Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here you can find the recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game SoundCon, Kiloheart, Rev Rooms, Soundcuts, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
Hey everybody, so thank you for joining me. I'm Nathan Moody, and we are going to be talking about sound libraries today. In fact, today's talk is officially called So You Want to Make a Sound Library. So what I want to focus on today is talking about principles, tips, tricks, and techniques for making a sound library. So this is a great talk if you've never made one before. If you've made some but maybe want to tweak your approach and technique, stay better organized, things like that. So I think this will be a fun time. I'm going to try to blaze through my slides relatively quickly because I think this is a topic that a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions about, and I am absolutely here to answer as many of them as best as I'm able. So I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, which is lovely. Thank you for joining me. But for those who are less familiar with me and my work, I'm lucky enough to be a sound editor and sound designer for primarily games, but also film. And I've released about 10 sound effects libraries so far. My sound effects library company is called Studio Obsidian, and they're all available on asoundeffect.com. Now, I have not made the most sound libraries of anybody alive. I do not earn my primary living off of making libraries. But I've done it enough to realize that the last 4, and actually the last 5, suddenly became a lot easier to make. They were faster, they were more joyful, they were less of a grind when I got to the metadata stage. And so I wanted to share some of those tips and tricks that have helped me stay prolific and hopefully stay high quality in the marketplace. So let's talk about what we are and aren't going to cover today. So as I said, anyone interested in the idea of a sound library, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to define as a cohesive body of audio files that's meant to be shared with others. We're also going to use the term sound library, different from a sound pack, because sound packs, that term has a lot of affiliation with the music industry and music production. So we're going to call them sound libraries, assuming that they are, for all intents and purposes, sound effects. The other thing that is important to note is that in today's talk, I'm not going to tell you how to make great sound and how to make amazing sound effects. You should be doing that already, or on the path to doing that already. You are already recording, synthesizing, or editing cool sounds. Now you're thinking about a way to share that with others to make their jobs easier. So we're going to ask a bunch of simple questions: the who, why, what, etc. And we're going to go generally in this order. We're going to talk about your customer or audience, what your goals are, how to do research and come up with a concept, organizing, mastering, and metadata. We will address a little bit of recording and designing, just in terms of some best practices, but we're going to not go into too much detail on that today. And then when are you going to release? How do you know something's finished? How do you get people to know that it exists, and how do you release it? And then where do you host this on your own? Do you go through a distributor? Those are the kind of questions we're going to answer today. So with no further ado, let's talk about your customer or audience. So I think that for sound libraries, there are kind of 2 audiences for most sound libraries. You can have sound libraries that are in-house. So this is for your studio, for your film, for your game project. They, in my experience, often fall into 2 categories: start of the project libraries and end of the project libraries. So the former, as you might imagine, would be creating palettes and food groups of sounds that will be shared with sound designers in the making of final assets that go into the game or film. And then at the end of the project, that's taking your assets, stringing them back together, and then having them go into the studio's sound library for later use, whether it's for DLCs or sequels or just derivative use in other contexts. So you can do this in-house, or you can be commissioned to produce something like this for a studio. Usually this is start of project kind of palette gathering kind of libraries. And I've been asked to contribute to those. And those are really fun because you're given a brief. It's someone else's brief. It's not something you'd write. It's a good challenge. And then you still have to follow a lot of the principles we're talking about for commercial libraries in terms of making sure it's delivered and polished and most of all, usable and useful. Speaking of commercially released, I think this is what most of us think of when we think of sound libraries, things that you buy on Pro Sound Effects or a sound effect or Soundly. These are libraries that others make for other editors. So there's two ways to kind of pay to get these done. Most people self-fund these libraries, and that's how most of us do it. We reinvest profits from our previous libraries, or we just use our disposable income to self-fund, whether it's gear or access or just our time. And then there's a concept I really like, which I call ghost funding, which is working often with a client whose budget is kind of constrained and negotiating some extended use beyond just that project. So I got hired to work on a film that was very independent, very low budget. And I said, pay for my hard costs like travel and other expenses, but don't pay me for my time. With that agreement, I'm going to retain all rights and I will use all of this for your film, but you don't have any exclusivity rights. And the client was like, wow, that sounds like a great deal. Sure. So there's some ways to kind of find interesting methods to kind of create a budget for your own projects like that. And in terms of who's going to be using this, usually sound editors. Every once in a while, we might sell directly to a developer who's just an indie dev and maybe a game studio of one, and they're going to be integrating stuff themselves. More often than not, our audience are other sound editors. So thinking like a sound editor is something we're going to talk about a lot today, because this really influences how findable your audio is. And if it's findable, it will get used. If your audio is not findable, it simply will not get used. So the other thing to think about is game versus linear needs. I think probably a majority of people here today might be from the game industry. So those needs for final assets, especially how loud they need to be, are maybe a little bit different sometimes than linear, but there's a lot of overlap between those two circles in the Venn diagram of sound for media. A lot of people ask questions about, should I have string outs or sausage files versus single files? And I think that the industry is absolutely going in the direction of string outs or sausage files being just easier to use, less onerous when they're ingested into somebody's sound search database. And so my preference is always and ever string outs. Single files are, for me, final assets that go into a game or a project. So I specifically have done a lot of work with other people's sound libraries, and I think that's maybe what's made me better than anything else, or more than any other aspect, has made me better at creating sound libraries, because I can anticipate what those needs are because I've had those needs. So whether it's mic position or articulation, like here, I'm playing with some steel rods and heavy steel plates. These kinds of real world experiences inform what you know are going to be holes in people's libraries that you can hopefully fill with fun, unique, and exciting material. So let's talk about goals. Why do you want to do this anyway? What's the idea behind making a sound library? I'm going to start with the bad news and something right out the gate that I think a lot of people are instantly curious about, because we're going to go in reverse order of appropriate motivations for making a sound library. The first one is money. You do not make sound libraries if you want to just earn a bunch of money. That's not what this game is about. There are, I think, I can count on less than one hand, people who do nothing but sell sound libraries and earn a living doing that. And I mean globally. So there are people who might earn most of their income doing this, but rarely entirely. So you just have to remember that at best it's going to be adjunct additional income. And it's really important to set your expectations really low when it comes to how much money you're going to make. And that should, and if that is your primary motivation, go ahead and try to do it. I'm just telling you, you're probably going to be disappointed. In better news, it's a great way to start building your reputation as a quality purveyor of sounds. It's great for relationship building. I've had sound supervisors email me saying, I just downloaded your thing and I'm using it on X, Y, and Z. And that's really exciting. And so the next time they need something custom recorded, they might call me because they are feeling that my work is a positive reflection on my professional skills. It's just practice doing sound libraries. Even if you never release them, you do them completely for yourself or you give them away for free on AirWiggles or the Field Recording Slack. It's great practice to have an idea and execute against that idea to build a small group of similar or related sounds. It's just a good thing to practice. And then passion. What do you love? What fires you up? What sounds do you absolutely just adore? Record that. Go deep on that. You want to do nothing but record insects for 6 months in your free time? That would be amazing. Or if you're like me and you're obsessed with metal sounds, really wring that material for all it's worth and see what you can do. So for me, when I do work in this sense, my slides aren't advancing. Here we go. I just love making other people's work sound better. That's actually my main goal. I get a huge rush knowing that my sound effects were used in some sci-fi thing or some Oscar-winning documentary. So for me, it's about what can I do to just elevate a production. And so for me, any reward beyond that is kind of icing on the cake. And it has allowed me to travel to beautiful places, travel to the bowels of old World War II ships, and just have really neat experiences myself. And I always find those really, really rewarding. So why are you going to make a sound library? You've got your goals, you've got your audience, you've got maybe kind of a concept. It's really important to, I think, to write yourself a creative brief. If this is going to be a commission library, the client's going to provide that to you. And if it's self-directed, you should create it. And it could be a paragraph, it could be a bunch of bullet points, it could just be something you jot in a notebook. But what I do is I actually write the product description before making the library. And this is hopelessly nerdy, but it gives me an end goal. This is how I want people to experience the library. This is my end goal, is to make sure that I am recording and editing to this kind of standard. And so I just write my product description page first and then change it as my ideas and the library evolves. And then it's one less thing I have to write when I'm done and I'm tired and I need to create some marketing collateral. So let's talk about research. So you want to record something, but what is that thing you're going to record? Is it easy to access? Is it easy to manipulate? There's a lot of variables here. So I think there's two ways to approach researching the subject of your sound library. The first is don't do it. Just be inspired. So follow your passion and don't even bother with the research. That's a legitimate technique. The other idea is, what do you struggle to find in your own library? Where are the holes in your library database? And then just think about what resources you have access to. This is kind of the classic kind of guerrilla filmmaking and low budget filmmaking mantra, which is, okay, if I want to make a film, what locations do I just have access to through friends or coworkers or where I work? And so starting to think about the production of a library in terms of like what resources do I have access to as an individual, that can lead you to some really, really fun ideas. That said, if you do want to do some research, then it's helpful to just start getting some data. Get to know the market a little bit. Go online. If you have an idea, see what other libraries are out there that also express that idea or cover that topic. Do some gap analysis. This is, where are there holes in the market? So that might not mean that there are no libraries of a certain thing. It might mean that there are libraries of that thing, but maybe not recorded from a certain perspective that would be interesting. Uh, Things that are recorded that are were kind of foundational and a lot of people use, but it was released 10 years ago and it's all 48 kilohertz and not ultrasonic. So there are some other gaps you can look at besides just content in deciding what might be a cool library to investigate. And then ask your colleagues, ask the sound community. If you're editing robot footsteps, what's the one piece of source that you keep wanting but you're not finding? I did a lot of this in researching my own analog ordnance sound library, which is all made with this thing behind me for science fiction weapon sounds. And like, that is a crowded market. There's a lot of products out there like it. So how can I differentiate it in the market? That was a big challenge. So my perspective on this is I do both. I always follow what I'm passionate about, but I validate what would be fun with kind of what I call lightweight market research. So one thing that's important to note also is that I have a friend who's a sound editor, and he's famous for saying there can never be enough door libraries, because if you edit for a living, you're going to burn through your available library of door sounds pretty fast. So they're easy to record, and there's a lot of them in the market, but there's always opportunities for new and fresh content. So what concept are you going to run with? So this is kind of something that we already talked about a little bit, which is deciding I'm going to create something new that doesn't exist, something that's brand new versus something that I know people always need. So evergreen versus new territory, or exotic versus bread and butter effects. Neither one is wrong. There's an absolutely huge need for great quality material in both categories. Another thing that is sometimes bundled together, but sometimes is also separate, is, are you designing a library that is full of ready for production designed material, or are you building a construction kit of parts? You can do both, but some libraries choose very clearly one or the other. Trailer libraries are a great example of designed sound effects more than construction kits. But Boom, of course, is pretty well known for doing both in almost all of their products. And then, like we said before, even if you're going to go kind of the evergreen bread and butter route, make it unique, whether it's the subject or a texture or perspective or a technique, or recording something really carefully with really kind of gritty mics. I have not seen a copper phone doors library yet, and I have no idea if that would be useful, but it's like, well, what if? And maybe you don't do that, but that leads you down the line to some other interesting concept that you might find compelling. And then, of course, I'm a huge fan of creative limitations, like a lot of people on this stream, I think. And so for me, limiting what I do in terms of the subject matter or the technique in making the sound, or the technique in performing the sound, or the technique in recording the sound, getting those limitations started early, even if they're kind of arbitrary, can make a project a lot more fun. So I don't make bread and butter effects. I imprint my own perspective and perception on how I record props and environments. And so my hope is that I'm delivering things that people need, but they always have kind of a stamp somehow of my unique perspective. And that's just my kind of philosophy in making sound libraries. So how the heck do you do this? How? Let's talk about organizing and recording and designing and mastering, and everyone's least favorite topic, metadata. It's actually my absolutely favorite topic. So we'll go through these one at a time. So how do you stay organized working on a body of work? My mantras is never throw raw files away. The better you get, the more opportunities you have through your career to go back, take what you thought was a crappy recording, and now all of a sudden you have the skills and the tools to breathe new life into old material. I recorded something that I thought was completely useless, didn't throw it away, and it went right into the last science documentary that I used. And the recording, I think, was 12 years old. You also want to make sure that you do that specifically so you can also roll back changes or versions. So if you start mastering a bunch of stuff and then you're still recording on the side, and then you realize you have to refactor your mastering decisions, having a chain of previous iterations and ultimately back to the raw files is really, really important to help you stay organized and also non-destructive. Retain all of the edited files and even mastered files, even if you don't ship them. So anything that stays on the cutting room floor should go right into your personal library. You don't have to ship with it, and that might mean that it's just not up to a certain standard, or it's lacking one of those core elements that you wanted to get in your concept, but it's still objectively a well-recorded sound. Keep it, use it, just don't ship it. The way I tend to do this is I have nested folders, and I have a folder structure that I just copy and paste every time I do a new sound library. And that makes starting a sound library so much easier. Every single library I ship has basically starts with 4 folders: asset, artwork, marketing, sessions, and video. So most of the audio work obviously goes in the sessions folder. And then when I've got everything all edited together, then I make a folder that is the actual name of the shipping library, and all the sounds and the metadata and the little booklet that I make goes in there. And so just having a folder structure that works for you, that you just copy and paste each time you do a new sound library, really kind of removes another little bit of friction from getting started. As I said, we're not going to dwell too much on recording and designing, but I do want to hit on a couple of principles specific to the release of sound libraries that I think are relevant. Do the best with what you have. None of us are in optimal rooms, even at some of the biggest studios in the world, their rooms are never perfect. There's always something about that room that they have to address. So if you are in an apartment and you have no acoustic treatment, and you have kind of inexpensive microphones, maybe start with a contact microphone library so that you don't have to worry about room reflections. That's right there a really fun, interesting, creative limitation. Practice sessions and throwaway work should be what we do every single day. We should have a daily recording practice, even if it's just on our phone, just to say we recorded something, listen back to it, think about the result, and reflect on our own practice. This is how libraries often get started, because you'll record something as part of your daily practice and you'll be like, wait a minute, that was fun, or I only articulated that prop one way. That might be a whole thing that I might just do, a sound of utensils in a kitchen, make that a library. So you just never know where inspiration is going to come from. So seed that inspiration for yourself with a daily creative recording practice. Scaling your variations to the market is handy. Game folks, you all know, of course, that it's really useful to have a lot of variations, especially for really common things like footsteps, hand pats, and gear rattle, things of that nature. Those considerations are not as important for linear media. So if you are going to also be creating recordings of relatively rare events where you're not going to get multiple variations, just keep that in mind. And maybe that thunder library you've been working on, maybe you need to record thunder for a few years before you get enough material, and that's okay. So busy mixes forgive so much. And this is something that I think a lot of people get really obsessed about, is over cleaning their sounds to a point where, as a sound editor, I can hear the noise removal, and that's not a good place to be. So if there's a little bit of noise or hiss or something like that, just always remember the context of use of the product that you're making. A lot of noise can be forgiven once it's put into a noisy mix. What's more important is to have that noise be consistent. So if you duck out to digital 0 in between 3 files in a string out, but you don't in the next 3, that's annoying. And that causes your customer to have to basically fix your sound in order to use it, or they're going to spend more time doing crossfades. Whereas if it's consistent in between each take, then that makes it a whole lot easier to deal with. So just keep that in mind. Clean recordings are always the goal, but it's also something that busy mixes in context can often forgive. Back up your shit. I don't think I need to tell you anything more about that. So in terms of recording, what I use my daily practice for is recording with mic setups that are inappropriate or might not be considered to be appropriate for a certain use. And in doing that, now I have this kind of superset of techniques that I've practiced with like no stakes. If it doesn't turn out, fine. I'll store the files, but I might never even edit them or ingest them in my library. But I've built up this lifetime of experience knowing what can work, what won't work, and taking bigger risks when the stakes are at zero is absolutely a great way to build up your repertoire of skills and techniques so that when it is time to record a library and those results really do matter, you're better prepared. So some quick words about designing. This is incredibly subjective because this is the most creative part of sound design, is doing the design. So the big thing I have to say is just you do you. Design what you think is cool, and chances are other people probably will too. But don't do anything your customers will wish you hadn't. And the classic example, of course, that probably all of us would recall is being overly aggressive with dynamics processing. So some sounds are awesome when 6 to 8 dB or more of transient is just lopped off, and you get to bring up that amazing decay or tail, and that's the juice. It sounds amazing. But if you're doing doors or footsteps, that's probably too aggressive. So if you are going to be like hyper processing something, just do that with foreknowledge and build that into your concept and let people know that's the idea you're going for. Because if someone buys a doors library and it's got disperser on it, I don't know, that's maybe a little strange. And so just keep in mind that you don't want your customer to feel like they need to undo a decision you made in making your library. Mic choice is a tough one. Some libraries, especially car libraries, gun libraries, have an obscene number of mic channels per recording. And in some contexts, that makes complete sense. And as a sound editor, I want every channel. But outside of those few use cases, it is much more common that people are using libraries because they don't have time to do it themselves. And so overwhelming a customer with mic choice, potentially on something really quite simple, can sometimes feel like you're abdicating decisions in terms of your own aesthetic and how you think something should be mixed. So I'm not saying don't offer multiple mic choices, especially if they're perspective choices. That's always awesome. But if it's the same recording, same perspective, and you've got 4 mic channels, just ask yourself, should I just mix this down? And are the discrete ISO tracks really important enough for someone who's under deadline, in a crunch, trying to get work done? Just ask the question. Back up your shit. Number 2. You might see that's going to be a trend. So my approach on designing sounds is completely context dependent. It's actually hard to see in this image, but when I do things like long ambience recordings, which I love doing, most people do, what will instantly make these things 5,000 times more useful is if you put markers with descriptive slugs of text at every significant kind of sound event. So that might be, it's an urban recording, and if there's a car horn, if there's someone yelling, if it's a seagull, if it's a pigeon, it's a skateboard going down the street, like put markers next to these significant events. And if you're using a sound librarian like SoundMiner, which is what I use, you can see all of those things and just, it's so much faster to zoom right in on the thing that you need. And then, of course, for gun sounds, for weapon sounds, loud and proud is how I like to roll. But I also still try to balance it, because if I'm going to crush every single transient in a explosion construction kit, we'll say, hypothetical example, I know that my clients are also going to crush the final composited sound they make out of all those layers. So if you start with no transients and then you try to build something that is impactful, it's going to be mushy. So you do have to think about that context of use, and just balance where you want to land aesthetically relative to the needs of your customer. So I was a mastering engineer for 7 years, and I love the topic of mastering. And it's really interesting how it applies to sound design. And so, specific to sound libraries, um, I don't know anyone who likes editing in 32-bit. So, in general, the vast majority of the market really wants 24-bit deliverables. You can and should record in 32-bit if you want, if that's appropriate for the material that you are making. But when you release your library, I cannot think of a good use case where I have encountered a file and I'm like, oh, I wish I had the 32-bit version. So you do you, but just know that in terms of marketplace needs, that generally caps out at 24-bit. Headroom is critical. Everyone's amount of headroom varies. I think most people agree that -1 decibel full scale for true peaks is very sensible. But obviously the whole rule of the game is just don't clip, and it's a lot easier to not clip if you are building in some headroom into your files. Loudness is so tricky with sound effects, because loudness on a 10-minute long uh, ambience is going to be very, very different than a single footstep. And so you can't measure the footstep with LUFS integrated. You can measure it perhaps with LUFS momentary, but then that's a different thing you're measuring against. So some people on short sounds tend to just don't worry about loudness in loudness units. Some do with momentary. Some just look at RMS values. And so there's really no right or wrong here, but the goal is sound events of the approximately same intensity level should be perceptually of similar loudness in your library. So consistency is way more important than individual loudness or RMS values. So this is, again, we're actually doing some research into what has been shipped that is similar to your library is really, really valuable. If you have it in your library, kick it out, take a look at it in RX or some other audio editor, and explore what its loudness characteristics are. And you'll start to see some trends, and then maybe that will help inform your approach to tackling loudness consistency. I also firmly believe that the material you record itself, it'll tell you how loud it can be at the end of the day. I can just hear it when I'm just stressing my sounds too much. I can just hear it. And so this sounds very philosophical, but this is 100% true in my lived experience. Both with music and sound effects, the material itself, that's going to tell you how loud it wants to be. Back up your shit. Maybe next talk will be backup strategies, but backing up your stuff is so important. I said it 3 times, and I'm not going to get into it any more than that. Do it. So with mastering, my mantra is, it's like I'm a doctor. I want to do no harm to the sounds. So my libraries, as a result, are actually not as loud as many of my colleagues. I don't like to think of them as competitors. We're all colleagues. Because I know that the people I sell to are going to put OTT and limiters and all sorts of dynamics processing on what I give them. Hopefully they won't do that with nature libraries, but who am I to judge? So for me, I don't want any SFX of mine clipping just because someone drags it or spots it into a Pro Tools or Reaper session. And just because they have an EQ instantiated with some phase shift, I don't want my work to instantly just clip because they put it on their timeline with an EQ strapped on that track. So that's my philosophy. No one is right or wrong here. This is all about experimenting and you finding your own path and your own philosophy about this stuff. So let's talk about metadata for a second after I have a quick drink of water. So metadata is something I love, lots of us love, especially now with a standardized metadata schema that's been published as the Universal Category System, or UCS. But a lot of my colleagues really loathe this topic and this approach and these tasks. So I wanted to share with you why I think they're important and some of the things that I've done to try to make those tasks a little bit more streamlined and less onerous. It's really important to think about metadata from a customer expectation standpoint. So this has to do with how things are formatted, what metadata is in what fields, and most importantly, once again, that metadata supports one goal, and that is a sound editor finding your sound and having that be the right sound for their needs at that moment. That is the game. We mentioned UCS already, and as an adjunct to that, one of its co-authors, Kai Paquin, has this amazing metadata guide that you can find online on a sound effect, and it's also available in a PDF. And that is not part of the UCS schema, but it is a really good collection of practices that many of us who make sound libraries adhere to. And so it covers all sorts of topics like how to do shorthand for mic perspective, for the mic perspective field in SoundMiner, stuff like that. And it just demystifies a lot of what should go where. When it comes to categorization, this can be tricky, especially if you're doing on-site or on-location recording or ambiances. You might hear 50 different things in one recording. How do you categorize it? And my rubric for this is just categorize it by its most important attribute. And so a classic example of that would be ambience forest and ambience bird song. So if I hear trees and leaves and branches clacking and the environment is very present in one recording, I'll categorize that as probably ambience forest. But if pretty much anyone's going to use this file for is pretty much just the bird song, I'll categorize it in that way. And so even in metadata, there is no right or wrong. It's all interpretation. Again, we already talked about this, how editors might search for it. The thesaurus is your friend in this regard. And this is a real challenge for people who are selling products in English, because metadata usually is just in English. If their first language isn't English, coming up with the right term is really hard. So that is one of the reasons why the Field Recording Slack is an amazing resource where people ask each other all the time, here's a sound, and I think it's this or this. And someone might be able to give you some nuance and say, oh, it feels more like a gust rather than a blow, if it's wind, for example. And so, lean on each other in the sound community to help kind of figure out some of this stuff and run ideas by each other. None of us are islands. We're all in the same lovely ocean of sound together. So how I do metadata is I use SoundMiner. I find SoundMiner is the best way to make sure that everyone who uses any metadata tool or sound library manager like SoundMiner or Soundly, this puts everything where it needs to go. I've had some other issues with some other metadata librarian apps that do really strange mappings of keywords into notes and, the description into keywords, and it's all kind of a little hard to manage. SoundMiner gets rid of all of those things. It is very expensive, but it is worth it. I've used it for 15 years and I love it, love it, love it. And what's shown here is this thing called the workflow panel. And this literally lets you make internal scripts for batch processing thousands and thousands of records potentially in the same way. And that's how I basically can fill out one field, say description, and I can just have that ripple into a bunch of other related fields that might be used in other librarian apps that I don't use. So yeah. The other thing that is important to talk about is you don't have to do any of this alone, just like we were talking about with coming up with terms and categorizations. You are making soundware. So why not treat it like software where you run early versions by your colleagues and get feedback and see what they think? So maybe there's an alpha testing phase where the sounds are mostly done, but there's a little bit of room for maybe recording some new material if your reviewers are like, oh, I wish you had more of this, that, or the other thing. There might be spelling errors and stuff like that. That's fine. Have people look at the metadata, give you feedback. Then you move on to beta testing. This is a proposed shipping library, showstoppers only, please. And so treating a library like a piece of software is I think a great practice, and I do this all the time. I'm sure there's a few people in today's audience who have had me ask, can you please listen to my library and give me some feedback? And especially when you get to beta testing, it's not about just listening to a library, it's about reading the library and checking all that metadata. So what I've adopted as a technique is also a little bit unusual in that I have a software always be shippable mindset. And to me, what that means is that I no longer allow myself to do another recording session until I have recorded and edited and mastered and applied metadata to the last session. And that way, every single time, the next recording session feels like I'm giving myself a gift for having done all of those previous steps. It also allows me to adjust as I go. If I find that my metadata approach earlier wasn't great, I don't have to wait until the end to find that I didn't do it the right way and I have to redo everything. And if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, or I get bored with my concept, or I really need some extra cash, or whatever the reason is, it's always shippable. It may not be big and complete and perfect, but I could ship this at any time. And I sleep better as a result of having this library that's just growing and growing and growing. And it's just kind of in a perfect state, even as it grows. So what's done look like? I think whether or not a library is resolved is far more important than whether it's actually complete. And by that, I mean, have you not kicked any cans down the road? Have you made sure you're not abdicating any responsibilities or choices you have to make about the sounds themselves? Are the sounds resolved enough for someone to listen to them, maybe process them a little bit, and then use them in their project? That's the only reasonable way I look at what done looks like. Killing your darlings is really important. You might have had a lot of fun on that one recording session, and you did some wacky, fresh sounds that came out of that. But if it doesn't fit with the rest of the library, put them on the cutting room floor. Pull them from the library, put them in your own personal library. Just don't ship them. You got to be really brutal with some of those decisions. And then as you go through alpha and beta testing, you're going to find some quality control pitfalls. And some of the most common ones I've seen in my own libraries before they ship, and in other libraries that have shipped, they include spelling or factual errors in the metadata or marketing material. Filler assets. Definitely don't do this. All killer, no filler. And this has to do with killing your darlings on the last slide. Verbal slates left in the recordings. I have shipped one sound where you can hear my voice slating a take, and that is incredibly embarrassing. And that's the kind of mistake you make only once, and you fix it from there on out every single time. It is shocking on a big library that's 3 or 4 hours long. It's not surprising that this slips by. It's really, really hard to review for that stuff. Uneven loudness for similar sound events. We talked about that earlier. No actual keywords. So a description is a prose description, doesn't have to be full sentences, is a prose description of what the recording is of, and maybe how it might be used and what its characteristics are. Keywords are individual words. So if it is a gunshot, it might say pistol, it might say handgun, it might say ordnance, it might say weapon, it might say sidearm. Those are keywords. And those are tough because those tend to want to be really unique per sound file. That's a lot of work. But if you don't do that, you're really harming the findability of your sounds. So my perspective on this is just I have to put up with how slow the QC process can be. And it's painful work. It's probably the 12th time you've heard all of your sounds and you're probably tired of it by now. But and we all make mistakes. Like there's no way to make things absolutely perfect. But don't let perfect be the enemy of done or shipping a library. But also make sure that you're being careful enough to not have some of those mistakes slip in there. So, have you met your goals for recording, designing, and all that stuff? Have you asked or do you want to ask others for feedback? Have you done that? Have you acted upon their feedback? Did you thank them nicely? Um, will you have time and energy to act upon that feedback and make sure that it's going to work on your timeline? If so, you're probably ready to release, but always remember, you never have to release anything. If you did a library with the idea of releasing it and you just don't, and whether it's an issue of confidence or your interest in it has waned, that's fine. I have at least 4 or 5 libraries that I intended to release that I just haven't, and I just use them in my personal work, and that's completely okay. If you do decide to release it, let's talk about marketing. So no one buys things that they don't know about. This is the core principle behind why you have to tell people your product exists. The good news is that this market is very small. There's not a lot of us in the world doing this incredibly fun, rarefied job. And so it's relatively easy to let a lot of people know about what you're doing. The flip side to that is that this market is also incredibly crowded. So that means that differentiating yourself from the rest of the pack is really important if you are releasing a commercial library. And let's just say it, promoting yourself is always super awkward. It just is. And saying that I'm great, pat, 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 it's awkward. And it's one of those things where you have to acknowledge the awkwardness and proceed anyway. So for marketing, I split my plans up into 3 chunks. The pre-release, which is announcing the thing is coming. Here's a thing you might want to get. Release is the celebration, like, yay, it's out, you can buy it now. Here's some examples, here's the full demo, stuff like that. And a lot of people miss this one. Post-release, remind people it's there. This is something that Penguin Grenade does incredibly well. They've been doing these recent spotlights of talented sound designers using their products as a post-release batch of content. And that's amazing because then you're elevating members of the community and you're also showing the possibilities of what can be done with your library. People buy libraries for one of 2 reasons. They need sounds right now, or this sounds like the thing I will need at some point in the future. The former are they're not impulse buys, but they're immediate buys because they fulfill a certain need. The other type is the kind of behavior where it'll go in their wish list. And if you're like me, I don't look at a sound effect wish list probably often enough when I'm looking for new sounds. And so reminding people the thing exists is really important. And that's all about creating this drumbeat of ongoing marketing. And marketing is the hardest to do when you're in between releases. So that's one of the reasons why post-release marketing is a way to kind of fill that void in terms of talking about what you're doing in between releases. So that is my perspective. So I think that it's hard and probably the most awkward part of this whole process. This is my least favorite part compared to metadata, for example. So with marketing collateral, I think there are things that you have to prepare when releasing your library. A thumbnail of the product image, a sound demo that is just sound only. If you want to do that with some video ancillary material, that's cool, but there has to at least be just a sound demo. A metadata list rendered as a PDF, usually just a text output or a text export from your library itself. An end user license agreement, or EULA. I think this is really important to remind people about the legalities of sound effects sales, which we don't have time to go into today, but that's a topic for a whole nother lecture. And then beyond those must-haves, here's, I think, what's nice to have. Teasers. So this is great for pre-release. Let people know that something is coming. Something specific is coming. This is its name. And then you, on the release date, finally drop the sound demo and stuff like that. On release day, have something that's unique beyond just the sound demo with videos or trailers. For other aspects, if you have the wherewithal to record behind the scenes videos of you working just on your phone, like that stuff is gold in terms of marketing. Um, we just talked about the pen grenade stuff, showing in use videos or demos, whether you do that yourself or you have a colleague or friend help you with that, really lets people realize, oh, okay, that's the true kind of possibility of that kind of library. And then I make a booklet with everything that I sell. I'm sure probably 90% of the people who buy my libraries never look at these things, but it goes into detail as to how I made it, what mics did I use, interesting techniques, stuff like that. And that's just value add because I know I'm selling to other people like myself. And if this seems daunting, hire people to do what you can't. I made friends with this guy on Instagram who is basically an Unreal based filmmaker. And he helped me make a whole bunch of really cool 3D robot assets with weapons for my analog ordnance library. And so, one of the joys of what we do for a living is that we have to collaborate with all sorts of people. And so do that for your marketing if you can. So when it comes to releasing, be sure it's really done. This gets back to our QC notes earlier. Have you checked it 10 times? Are you reasonably confident that everything's good to go? Did you ask for help when you needed it? And then check in with yourself. How are you feeling about it? Are you nervous? Are you confident? My perspective, I'm always nervous, no matter what, every time I release something. And then our final topic is commerce platform. Where do you sell this? And oh my gosh, is this personal? So we'll talk about just kind of the decision factors that go into deciding where you're going to sell your stuff. The biggest kind of part of that flow chart is if you want to use a distributor or if you want to sell stuff yourself. Distributors include people like, or sites like Gumroad, a sound effect, pro sound effects, stuff like that. Direct sales is just having a website that you sell your product through. You set up Shopify on a WordPress site or Wix or something like that, and then you just sell direct. So these are the things that you need to think about in making this decision. So if you don't have a website, you'd have to build one. A distributor already has a website. If someone has problems downloading your files, you have to provide customer service. A distributor can do that for you. If you want to retain the identities and of people who buy your products and build a marketing mailing list, oh my gosh, is that valuable? That is a primary value exchange that you give up working with the distributor. And then marketing support, if you start to build a good track record, you can start asking a distributor to help you market your products, whether that's doing sales or co-marketing and stuff like that. So one is not better than the other because it just depends on how much time do you have, what is of interest to you in terms of tasks on your plate that you want to handle. So all super, super personal. And it ultimately comes down to how much money you're willing for a distributor to take out of your net profit for providing all of those services versus you wanting to keep all that revenue and you doing it yourself. So for me, I just happen to sell through a sound effect, and that's not a promotion. I have some promotional, some marketing agreements with Asbairn, who's been a great partner for me over the years. But I know a lot of people who vastly prefer selling all their stuff on their own website, and I know people who absolutely do both. So this is, again, not saying you should do one thing or the other. Just consider these things in making that decision yourself. So I think libraries are always worth doing, even if you don't release them, because it's good practice to build a concise, focused palette of sounds. And that is a skill that will always pay dividends later. Releasing something itself is good practice on its own. Releasing an album versus recording an album, that is good practice. Same thing with libraries. Not everyone will find that interesting, in which case that's cool. But if you think that would be of interest to you, I think it's good practice actually releasing something if you can. Remember, the market is small and crowded, so the best rewards for doing this are personal and professional. They are not going to be monetary. And at the end of the day, I gave this talk today because I want all of you to make amazing killer libraries that make me want to buy them and makes me want to use them in my own work. And if that happens, I think that rising tide will float everybody's boat. So with that, it's time for Q&A. My socials are on here. If you're on AirWiggles, my DMs are open to everybody. Always happy to answer your questions within the vagaries of how much time I have, given my job and everything like that. But yeah, that's it for the primary content. I'm going to stop sharing and let's start getting into some questions. Let me open up the questions panel. All right. Oh, got quite a few. Thank you all for being with me today and asking some great killer questions. I'm going to have some water and we're going to dig right into some of these. All right. Got a couple questions about end user license agreements. Could you share some resources to learn more about EULA and how to manage it? So, if you have ever bought a professional sound library, it comes with a EULA. And so, the best research you can do is just read every EULA you've ever downloaded. If you've thrown them away, download everything again. And that's a lot of where my best practices have come from. A lot of us in the industry are also very concerned about our sounds being used in AI data training data sets. And so that's another place where you can say in your EULA, this is, I'm going to allow or disallow that. And these days it's good to make that choice very, very overtly in your EULA. At the end of the day, really what you should do is talk to an intellectual property lawyer or an IP lawyer, and they can help true up any legalese or other terms. Avishai asked a very similar question, which is, where can I get a very decent, very basic one made? Same answer I just said applies to this question, but if anyone wants me to just send them one of my booklets that I include in my sound libraries, I'll do that. So hit me up in DMs on AirWiggles, and I'll just send you the PDF. And it's always the last page on the PDF, so that can give you a starting point if you don't have one. So what else? Faith asks a fantastic, very tricky question. How much do you charge for a sound library in the open market? Oh, that is really, really tricky. Anyone who remembers my pricing audio services talk from AirCon 2023 knows that for services, I don't like to talk about price in dollar or euro or yen amounts because it's super unique to each regional market. With products is different. So we are all selling to each other on the international stage. And I think that it's much more important to be concerned that you're undervaluing your work than pricing your library too high. Because we're all creatives, we're artists, we're designers, and we tend to devalue the value of our own work. And so what I would do is just simply do some price comparisons with things that are similar, just like buying a house. When you buy a house, you look at comparable houses on the market. You need to look at library comps, comparable libraries to yours. How might they be comparable? Comparable in asset count or total running time would be one measure. Comparable in terms of content type, doors, explosions, Tasmanian devils, whatever that might be. Relative availability of those sounds. A friend of mine has a MI-42 or MI-24 Soviet helicopter library. Talk about something that's incredibly hard to get access to. He can charge whatever he wants for that because the sounds are rare and not common. And pricing that high only makes sense. I think his is one of the few on the market. We already talked about size a little bit. And also metadata. If you have a Doors library that sounds amazing, but there's no metadata, I think that should be sold for less than a Door library with unbelievably rich and useful metadata. So comparable products are how I would address that. And then it's just a matter of, do you want to be under, at, or below where those comps are relative to to your product. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Got some other questions here. Let's talk about blimps. Let's talk about gear. We haven't talked about gear at all. What's my go-to for wind protection and protection of other gear against the elements? The two keys for me are rigid blimps. There's three: rigid blimps, furry windscreens, and dry bags. That's it. I have never, and believe me, I've wasted so much money on non-rigid wind protection, and it's almost all been garbage, in my opinion. So for me, it's always a rigid blimp with a furry windscreen, which I don't always use because I don't always need it, and then a dry bag. If it's really going to be rainy, there's this stuff called self-sealing silicone tape, and it doesn't have adhesive on it. It just sticks to itself, and it's meant for like hose repair and stuff like that. So if you have two XLR connectors connected together, but that might get wet and it's carrying phantom power, I will single or double wrap it in self-sealing silicone tape, and that has been really useful. And then dry bags are just great. I have all sorts of sizes of dry bags and also of different thicknesses based on whether or not they're going to be abraded or just sitting on the ground, and they don't need to be that tough, and they can be lighter weight. And then the only other thing is really just shock protection. So making sure every mic is in a lyre or suspension system, which will also protect from wind. Actually, one of the things I love recording is wind. And if you don't have that kind of stuff set up, you'll get a lot of mechanical vibrations transmitted through a tripod. So those are my go-tos for environmental protection of equipment. Since we're talking about equipment, what's the minimum technical setup for a library? I would argue there is none. If you have a recorder and a microphone of any type, you're ready. Like I said in an earlier example, if you have poor acoustics and you just want to use a contact mic, cool. That could sound really, really amazing. If you only have one mic and it's an Omni, Randy Tom famously said accurately that any mic is directional enough if it's close enough to the sound source. So you can use mic technique to overcome polar patterns that you may not have in your mic locker. Stereo versus mono is a very interesting topic because for me, I have like a threshold above which stereo makes sense, and that threshold is actually pretty high. So a lot of us working in games, we're trying to emulate the real world, and the real world is mostly mono sound emitters being propagated through space, which we then hear reflections of, and that gets put into our stereo monitoring system called our ears. And so finding reasons for things to be stereo for me that's a high bar. And so for me, like guns, weapons, special abilities, magic, totally makes sense to have that stuff be stereo. All Foley is almost always mono. There are some exceptions. So for me, I think you can do a ton of damage with just one cardioid mic and a recorder. You can do a lot of damage with just a stereo recorder and use certain techniques where if you want stereo, you hold it one way. If you only want to record with one capsule, just hold it a certain way and then just ditch the off-axis capsule in post later on. So I think if you just have a phone, you can record sound, which is really exciting. And I don't know, phones do kind of sometimes cool things with audio too. So I'm not saying that you maybe should release a sound library recorded entirely with your phone, but if that's a windmill you want to tilt at, like there are no rules in this industry. There's only guidelines, and I think rules are made to be broken. So let's see. Here's a question about loudness. So let's circle back to that topic because this isn't always a useful thing to discuss. So do I have a specific loudness compliance when mastering a library based on assets? I kind of do, actually, but it's different asset to asset. Hang on, Fernando. I'll answer your question after this water. when I do sound libraries that fit in a certain context, like these are ambience beds, or these are weapon sounds, or these are mechanical Foley sounds. I've done enough sound editing that I know where those things are going to land, usually in the final mix. And I try to get them in that ballpark. I never try to be perfect about it. But if it's a really quiet, some examples. So, and again, these are personal, so these are not rules by any means. But I know that if it's a quiet, still kind of nature room tone, outdoor ambience, if that's at minus 30 LUFS integrated, that's probably too loud. Um, if it's really active with lots of bird song and animals that are very close, or there's lots and lots of wind gusts and stuff like that, if that comes in at minus 30 LUFS integrated, that might be appropriate, or maybe even a little quiet. But I don't try, and I don't do audio for like Walla libraries. I don't do efforts or remote libraries with a human voice. So if I did, I would probably have like a minus 24 to minus 18 kind of range in terms of loudness units, probably measured short for products like that. But I never go in saying like everything in this library is going to be normalized to this loudness level, because even within a library, you can have lots of different kinds of sounds. Impacts should be always louder than scrapes, should be always louder than handling. So you start to get these kind of shorthands for where that stuff needs to land. And that just comes with experience. Thank you all so much for these questions. These are great. Okay. This is really relevant, actually, because I don't know anyone who hasn't dealt with this question. So I've done the bad thing where I've recorded a bunch of sounds over the last couple of years and haven't named or organized them. Any tips for tackling all that to get it sorted? So it depends. Like any question you're going to ask me today, this depends. This challenge is the reason why I do metadata immediately as I can after a recording session, for one simple reason: I'm going to forget what I did. I'm going to forget why. I'm going to forget what mic I used. I'm going to forget what the perspective was it close, medium, far, on or off axis? I'm going to forget all of that. Oh, it's a stereo file. Oh, is this decoded mid side, or is it encoded mid side to left right, like or unencoded mid side? So like it's really, for me, and maybe this is because I have a crappy memory, important to do that very fast following after the recording session. For old archive stuff, I have a folder like this. I think everyone does. I go through it every once in a while and kind of try to chip away at it as time allows. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. But that's also why for my raw field recording folders that aren't actually part of libraries, I will name them with the date. And if it's a trip, it's the start date of that trip. And I will say where it was, or sometimes what it was, but more often where. And sometimes I can remember those things. One of the other things I do is I take photographs of locations if I'm recording in the field. And part of that is so I can use the geotagged metadata on the photo, so that when I import the photo as cover art for the recording in SoundMiner, it will automatically bring in the lat, long, and altitude if recorded in the photo's EXIF data metadata. But I don't have that for stuff that I did 15 years ago. So this is a challenge. So it's a matter of what your patience level with it is, how important is it, and you know what? If you can't remember what the stuff was, use the universal category system, determine what that sound generally is, label it that way, give it some basic metadata about just what does it sound like, and just use it in your personal library. So you don't have to be perfect for your own personal use, but I think you do have to be closer to perfect for shipping libraries. Let's see. This is an interesting question from Randy. What do you think about more than one version of mastering on the same source, like natural and 30 dB compression? This is why we're friends, Randy. 30 dBs of compression. Heck yeah. It's a good question. I think that this is where I stop in deference to my customers when it comes to libraries. So I like to take an approach where my aesthetic, my stamp, is put on everything that I record. But for something that's really extreme, I will do one of two things. I will either stop myself and say, I'm going to let the customer do this. Or I might even put in the metadata, like parentheses, crush this to hell. And it'll make a sound editor laugh and they'll probably try it and they'll be like, oh yeah, that sounds great. Or this is a great example of releasing like a construction kit library. And then as part of that library, have like a bonus section that is designed sounds where you can just go ape shit with your processing just to show what the outer, possibility space is for your sounds. And people do that all the time. I did that on a couple of libraries of my own, where the recordings are like, the construction kit is like pretty natural sounding, and then doing composites or maybe even not much of a composite, just doing some time manipulation and dynamics handling can really kind of make people go, oh, okay, now I understand what the outer possibilities are of these sounds, and I can use that designed one if it's perfect, or I can use that as inspiration to do that to other things in the library. So that's how I handle that kind of thing. Oh yes, the bane of field recordists everywhere, airplanes. The only way I think around the issue of airplanes in field recordings is to record for very long periods of time. I have been on field recording sessions for films where I couldn't choose the location. We had to record where the film was set. And there was not only a major US airport 2 hours away, there was an air freight hub 40 minutes away. And so I wound up having to record for a day and a half to get quiet takes of 5 to 10 minutes at a time. It was a real pain. And this is a bane of our industry and our modern world. If you can choose where to go, you can do some research and try to look at flight paths and topography to try to get some better guesses. And this comes with experience as to where you may be a little bit more isolated from those kinds of sounds. But highway and traffic is actually way easier to plan around and avoid than the dreaded airplane. Question about artwork. So you might have noticed in my libraries, they have a very consistent aesthetic. So what I did is, I do have a background as a visual artist and designer, but I wound up hiring a designer to create the visual language of my products. And so he completely designed the first one, and then part of the agreement was I would get his Photoshop file, and then from then on I wind up making like derivative versions of it. Sometimes I'll ask him to kick in, like, I can't get this logo right. Can you come up with something? Because he's far better designer than I am. His name is Corey Holmes, by the way, CoreyHolms, and he's amazing. He's worked with, well, you go to his website, you'll see who he's worked with. And I'm honored to have him as a friend and a vendor. And he loves working with people in audio. So if you ever want to hire Corey, look him up. He's amazing. But you can do this with friends of yours that work at your game studio. 3D artists aplenty, 2D artists aplenty. Like, ask around. And of course, most importantly, pay people for their effort and their amazing work product. Let's see, how are we doing on time? We are going to run out of time in about 5 minutes because I want to make sure that we can clean the slate a little bit in between talks, because the next talk is happening at the top of the hour. But yeah, we'll go through some of these really quickly. Here are two that are kind of maybe related. How do you come to the conclusion that a sound effect meets the intended standards and makes the library versus one that gets cut, especially if you're creating sounds that don't have a specific project it's intended for? Here's an example. I did a sound library called Metal Motion, and the whole idea was there's lots of ronk and impact libraries out there. I wanted to have a library specifically that was metal objects moving. And so I wound up doing sessions where the best sounds were impacts. The best sounds were these amazing impacts, but they didn't fit the library. So just in terms of context, amazing recordings didn't fit the concept. And so those got pulled, and those are in my personal library now. Sometimes it's something that sounds great in the moment, and you're like, oh, this is totally a keeper. And then you bring it in, and then once you apply a little bit of compression, you actually find this is a totally different prop, but it sounds just like this other prop that I recorded with. They're too similar. I'm going to pick the most characterful one and then reserve the other one just because the sonic similarities are too great. So those are a couple of examples. Slightly related to this one is a question from Mark. I did abandon a sound library of nature sounds just because I felt that during the processing, I thought I was doing a good job. And then in the final analysis, listening to it all as one piece, there are nature ambiances that I had to process too heavily in order to sound right. So I finished the library, and there are some nice moments of it, but not enough nice moments to make a full library. And so I just pulled that and have that in my personal collection. So that's an example. I have another one that I think just isn't unique enough. Because EMF, electromagnetic field recordings made with the Soma ether or other kind of, or, basically pickups, electromagnetic pickups. Those are kind of a dime a dozen and really common. And I was recording one, and I just found that they sound too similar to what's in the market already. There's nothing differentiating it. So I have a bunch of great recordings out of those sessions, but didn't feel like it was ready for prime time. So those are some examples of stuff I have recorded and not released. The question about naming is interesting. I am kind of a glutton for punishment, often coming up with names that are hard to pronounce for my own products, and I'm not sure I would recommend that as a strategy. But I like portmanteaus, I like spoonerisms, I like mashing up two words, I like inference. I love alliteration, so I'm a word nerd. So that for me makes coming up with a name fun, and I named them more like albums might be named than Doors Volume 1 kind of thing. And that's just to keep me interested. It's just something I do for completely nerdy reasons. In terms of the process, sometimes it's right out of the gate. Sometimes the concept is the name. Sometimes the name of the product changes until the very 11th hour, and it finally comes to me. So when that happens is all over the map. We got time for the last question, which is if anyone does not know the difference, at the top of the talk, I talked about string outs or sausage files, and these are single audio files with all of the variations of multiple takes spaced out in one audio file. So it might be 16 gunshots, or it might be 8 hand claps, or it might be 12 bricks hitting a chain link fence. And so those are called, I call those string outs. I don't love the term sausage file. So that is different than, brick hitting chain fence 1, brick hitting chain fence 2, where each file might be only a few seconds long, and an individual files. And the reason why I don't like those is that it's slower to evaluate my choices, because I've got a digital audio workstation running with my project in it, and I've got my Sound Librarian app running with my library in it. And if it's all in one string out file, I can just sit there and hit play, and it's just going to play through all of the variations. and I hear the one that's just the right intonation, I hit stop, select it, and then drag or spot it to my session. And so that's why for professional sound editing, I think that string outs are always the way to go. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and your attention and your patience. I hope this was valuable. Again, I will be all over Air Wiggles as usual for any follow-up questions, and my DMs are always open there. So hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thanks so much for joining us.